All right. Remember last week when I told us that we're going to pick up the pace as we move through Genesis? I don't want to say that I lied to you, but then I realized that we're going to have the first introduction to the person of Joseph, and we need to take our time when we are introduced to Joseph, because the story of Joseph essentially takes up from chapters 37 to chapter 50, the end of the book of Genesis. It's not all about Joseph, but beginning in chapter 37 and through the end of the book, we have basically, along with a lot of plots and subplots and object lessons, and we'll see some other things as we go through, we have the story of how the children of Jacob become the tribes of Israel, right? So, chapter 37, if you'll recall what happened in chapter 36, we have Esau's descendants, which pretty much closes the door on the promise that God made to Ishmael, right? He's gonna bless Ishmael, so, and then he's gonna bless Esau, and so that basically closes the door on those parts of the family, right? They will pop back up occasionally throughout the text. We'll see one in chapter 37, but the focus now is going to be essentially completely on Jacob and his children, which will become, as we saw in chapter 35, Jacob is renamed Israel. Jacob, the supplanter, is renamed God will strive, or God will rule, as what Israel really means. So then we come into chapter 37, and we have the story of how the children of Jacob become the tribes of Israel. It also, I want you to notice a few things as we read the story. I want you to notice the providence of God. You can even call it well, let's just settle on providence. The providence of God, who uses the actions of his people, who uses the actions of people to accomplish his purposes and his mission. One of the clearest examples that we see that God uses the actions of the elder brothers of Joseph to prepare a place for the elder brothers themselves to be rescued from a famine. So we'll get there through the story, but I want you to notice that God is not surprised by anything that happens. Consequently, he's not surprised by anything that happens to you and I.
Thank you.
But he uses the free will actions of the brothers to accomplish the mission that he had purposed all along. So if you want to understand how to navigate the predestination argument and the free will argument, here is a good place to start. That the brothers make free will decisions on their own, but those free will decisions serve God's predetermined plan and purpose. Okay? Does that make sense, or is that confusing? I don't know if I can do anything about it if it's confusing right at this moment.
Can I interject something?
You may certainly interject something.
You bring up a point that has been really challenged in the Jewish faith by a lot of people, including some of the great sages, who spent a lot of time talking about, do we truly have free will, or does God kind of nudge to make sure that our free will goes his way? And I've heard a lot of arguments, and I've read a lot of things, and I've actually had these discussions myself, but I have never heard a satisfactory explanation.
Well, in the Christian tradition, we have what's called Calvinism and Arminianism, and it's the same argument. You know, we have been arguing over, is it man's free will or is it God's predestination? Because the Bible teaches both. And
yes, exactly.
Therein lies the crux. Therein lies the problem. It teaches both, and to a human mind, to my mind, and any human mind, they are at opposite. They are at odds, right? You can't have both, we think. However, I think the story of Joseph helps us to understand that no, the brothers make their own decisions. They're the ones who decide to throw Joseph in the pit and sell him into slavery. But God's purpose is to call his people out of Egypt. God's purpose, which he also says, they're going to sojourn in Egypt for 400 years while the evil of the inhabitants of the land are built to full. So then he will use those same Israelites to come and announce and perform his judgment on those people. So it's God has determined this is going to happen.
Right.
But he does not interfere with the free will. So then we have to go to the pre-knowledge, right? Okay, so the argument is, well, God has pre-knowledge. That is not satisfactory. It's not going to satisfactorily answer the question either, right? So are we in this little small group with me leading going to come to a satisfactory conclusion? No, no, we're not.
No. And I wasn't asking for a solution. I was simply.
I knew you weren't. When you started talking about sages and stuff, I said, well, he's ignoring me. So no,
Yeah.
I'm joking. No, but I guess my point is nobody has ever satisfactorily brought up a conclusion to this argument that satisfies a human mind.
Right.
And I think therein is the problem. It's a human mind.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
In God's economy, in God's, you hate to apply human attributes to God, but in God's mind or in God's, however God does these things, it makes total and perfect sense.
Yeah. Well, in Esther, it helped me when Mordecai told her.
Who knows? For such a time as this, Esther.
Yeah, I was going to butcher it, so I'm glad you just took
God
it.
has you here for such a time as this.
That's right. If you don't do it, someone else will.
Yeah, that's a very good statement. It goes right along here, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, hey, Jeff. So,
yeah.
I mean, so I think about this here. It is God's will, and His will be done. I look at it kind of like this. If I looked at my life, I'll soon be 70 years old. If I looked at all the events and opportunities that have occurred in my life where I was given free will, and so many times I made some really bad choices, but yet everything, I don't know if it's a redirect, I don't know what the deal is, but God manages that will, because His will be done.
Mhm.
And just like you said, either He does it through me, He does it around me, through somebody else back to me.
Right.
But it's all interwoven. It's like the odds of winning the lottery. They're 320 million to 1. How many variables have occurred in my life and has brought me to this point in my life?
It's innumerable.
Yeah.
But and I've said it. The reason I'm a pastor is because I had a heart attack.
Yeah.
Right. Well, God knew that was going to happen, and God had prepared that to happen. He prepared the people who were going to meet me. Right. He prepared Larry McCarty to have a cardiology appointment the very same day I had a cardiology appointment, and I was going to wear a Christian t-shirt. Right. That's why I'm a pastor. But what led up to my heart attack was a series of bad decisions on my part. Right. You want to know what I was eating the night I had a heart attack at midnight? We were cooking country ham, and I was scarfing it down. Right. And so there, yes, there's a family history there, but my diet was not optimal for somebody with a family history of heart disease. So my decisions, God did not give me the heart attack, right? The heart attack came because I didn't recognize or was unwilling to recognize that I had a propensity to heart disease. And so therefore I didn't manage it. And it caught up to me, but God knew that. And that was part of God's plan for me. So, but how that works together, I don't know, but God.
Well, the other thing too is, as humans, it's our, I don't know what you want to call it, our downfall for sure, but it seems like we have to understand everything. And if things happen in our life that we believe that God's in control, but we don't understand it, then it drives us crazy. And that's why we can't come to some level of agreement as to why these things are happening, and do we really believe that God's still in control? I mean, it's just, I think it's back to the faith. Do we have faith in believing that God has our best interest at heart?
Do we
Well,
believe him? Do we believe him when he says, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways"?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right?
Or we just
Because
accept
I
it, or we
want God's
still,
ways to be my ways. I want God's thoughts to be my thoughts. That
Yeah.
way I can fit God in my mind. But if I can fit God in this little puny mind, he's not
Yeah.
much of a God.
He's not
So
God.
therefore, there comes a point where I have to say, the New Testament is very clear. No one can come to the Father unless they're drawn by the Spirit. And yet at the same time, the very same Father says, choose. You have to choose. Well, how can I choose if you don't draw me? Because you said them both. You said,
Mhm.
it's predestination, while at the same time you've given me the command to choose. You cannot be just and command me to do something I'm not able to do. So somehow these two mesh and match, right? And neither apparently the Jewish sages or the Christian sages have ever been able to satisfactorily answer that question to satisfy the human mind, and we never
Right.
will. We never will. One day, well, I mean, in eternity we will, but
Not here.
Not here.
Not here.
Maybe like in God's thinking, this is not the time or place.
Yeah.
It will be revealed to you when it's time.
Maybe it's so
When it's
big that
time.
we can't, it would explode our brains. I don't know.
I think it
Yeah.
would. It'd drive us crazy.
It probably would.
Probably would. So that's when we come and we say, okay, God, we trust you. I trust that this is for the best, that you have our best in mind, because that's what you promised. So I'm going to believe in that. All right, Genesis chapter 30. Say anything else before we get to Genesis. Genesis 37, beginning verse 1. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Notice how the text starts. Joseph. Now, wait a minute. Joseph is number what of 12? Right? Joseph, yeah. Go on, Carrie. You can unmute.
Is it 11?
He is 11, right? He got a baby brother Benjamin that killed his mama, right? During the birthing process, she dies with Benjamin. So why does Moses, who's writing the text, why does Moses start with Joseph? That should tell us, okay, something's going on, something special about Joseph, right? Joseph is going to play a prominent role. Now, I think before we actually get into the text, we need to talk about the tribes of Israel, because if you're going to continue to study the Bible, you're going to have some confusion one day when you find the list of the 12 tribes. When the 12 tribes are listed out, Joseph is typically not one of them. Joseph has two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and they are adopted by Jacob near the end of his life. And so oftentimes you will hear Manasseh and Ephraim. Ephraim actually, matter of fact, becomes the prominent, one of the most prominent, if not the most prominent, tribe of the northern kingdom, the 10 northern kingdoms that break away from the southern kingdom. He's actually Joseph's brother. So there are 14 names available to name the 12 tribes of Israel. Oftentimes Levi gets left out because Levi has no land given by God as an inheritance, because Levi has been chosen by God in place of the firstborn. If you'll recall that in Exodus, the tribe of Levi has been chosen by God to be his priest and to be his servants and serve the priest and all of that. So they don't get an inheritance in the land. The Lord is their inheritance, and they are able to have cities throughout the land of Israel, and they get special privileges and so on and so forth. So they're often left out in the list. Sometimes Manasseh and Ephraim are both listed, but those are both from the tribe of Joseph. I know it gets confusing. There are only 12 tribes, but the way that the scripture presents them, there are 14 names that are used for those 12 tribes. So sometimes when Ephraim and Manasseh is used, that just is the tribe of Joseph. One of them stands for the tribe of Joseph. Sometimes it's one of those are listed and the tribe of Levi is listed. So my point being, don't get all caught up. It's the 12 tribes of Israel, right? Don't so worry about the names. God's got it all straight in his head. And I don't have a good answer for why he uses Ephraim and Manasseh sometimes, and sometimes he doesn't use them both. Sometimes he picks one, sometimes he picks the other, sometimes he put Levi in there. I'm sure there's a reason. I don't know what the reason is. We're not going to run into that today, but as you read the scripture, even in the New Testament, you're going to see the same thing. Just understand that's what it is. Manasseh and Ephraim are the tribe of Joseph. Together they comprise the tribe of Joseph, or the child of Israel. Joseph is represented by Ephraim and Manasseh. Okay, now the text. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. So he was only with the sons of that he was with Dan and Naphtali and Gad and Asher. Those are the sons of the servant women. So Leah and Rachel servant women. Bilhah and Zilpah gave Jacob four sons, and they were Gad and Asher and Dan and Naphtali. So Joseph is out there with them serving. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now, don't think of Joseph as a snitch. That's not what's going on, because we're going to see in just a second that this is really Jacob's problem and Jacob's issue, because Jacob is the one who is sending Joseph, his favorite, out to check on his brothers, which is a recipe for disaster.
Mhm.
I'm going to send the teenager out to check on his full-grown brothers. So he goes out with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors. That, I don't know where the robe I do know where the robe of many colors come from. That's what is translated in the Septuagint. The word is pas. The Hebrew word is pas, and it means hand. And literally, the only other time the word is used, it talks about a robe that goes down to your feet. Right? It's an ornamental robe. Well, it might have been many colors. I don't know. Many colors comes into the text when they translated the Hebrew scriptures into the Greek, the 70 some. Septuagint means the 70. There was like 73 or 77, I forget, Jewish scholars who translated it into Greek. And so we call that the Septuagint, and that's what they chose to translate this passage as. And so we have carried that through the English translation since. We are getting so far in the weeds tonight. I apologize.
It's good.
We all grew up, learning about the coat of many colors. We sang the song, the coat of many colors. I think Dolly has a song, the coat of many colors. Yeah, it wasn't a coat of many colors. It was an ornamental robe, right? It was a long sleeved, down to your ankle, ornamental robe. And a lot of commentators will tell you, and now I'm just repeating what the commentators say, that was a sign of authority, that the robe that Jacob gave to Joseph was a sign of authority, that he had laid his authority, he was putting his authority on Joseph. So when he sends Joseph out to check on his brothers, he's doing so as Jacob's representative. Now that does put Joseph in a bad position, does it not?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, young man, right? And when it says he's the son of his old age, that can also mean that Joseph was an old soul, right? We all talk about those people who are old souls, right? He was a mature child. It could mean that, or it could mean that because he wasn't the last child. That was Benjamin. Benjamin was the child of the old age. So chances are it means that Joseph was a very mature, young teenage boy, which we see played out later in his life. He's a very godly young man. He's a very mature young man. He has it all together. So all of these things are playing into the fact that Jacob has not learned his lesson from his own childhood. He didn't learn his lesson from being with Laban, and he has not learned the lesson that having favorites in a family never works. But he's picked his favorite, and it's Joseph. And it's Joseph because Rachel is the one that gave him Joseph. Probably Joseph resembled his mother, which also was not helping Jacob to love him the same as he loved everybody else. But for whatever reason, Jacob lays his authority on Joseph and says, go check on your brothers. Well, obviously his brothers are not going to enjoy that. Verse 4, but when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf. His brother said to him, are you indeed to reign over us, or are you indeed to rule over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. I think this is the first dream recorded in the Bible in which God does not speak. That's neither here nor there. That's a little piece of trivia that was running around my mind. That's your freebie. I think this is the first dream in the Bible where God does not have an appearance or speak. But it is a prophetic dream, and it is a prophetic dream. Notice that it is about bread, in essence. It's about grain. Now, these people were shepherds. They didn't typically grow grain, right? But this dream is prophetic in that Joseph would be the one who would provide bread. They would come bow down to Joseph. His sheath would rise above theirs, and he would actually rule them. But I don't know, for whatever reason, maybe Joseph thought it was very important. Maybe he wanted their interpretation of it. Maybe he wanted them to sit around the fire and discuss it and figure out what it meant. Or, like many teenage boys at 17, hey, guess what?
He just wanted to be a snot.
Yeah. So for whatever reason, he decides to tell his brothers that dream, which would not have been a very mature decision on his part, but he's 17. Let's remember that. And 17-year-olds don't always make the best of decisions. Rarely do they make the best of decisions. And then, so they hated him even more. Then he dreamed, verse 9, another dream, and told it to his brothers and said, behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bound down to me. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. So he has another dream, and this time, not only does it encompass his brothers, it encompasses his father and mother, right? Now his mother is going to die or dead. She's dead at this point. She had Benjamin, so it must be talking about his father and his wives. In essence, everybody associated with with Jacob is going to come and bow down. So first of all, his brothers are going to come and bow down, right? And that involves bread. They come looking for grain the first time they come, and eventually his father and all who are associated with his father make the trip to Egypt, and Joseph is the ruler in Egypt. So yes, indeed, they will figuratively bow down. But as we go through here, I want you to notice the similarities with somebody else that we know and love from the New Testament. Somebody else who was sent to his brothers. Somebody else who was hated by his brothers. Somebody else who was sold into slavery in essence by his brothers. Somebody else who was killed and put in a pit by his brothers, right? Somebody else who was the favorite of his father. So just remember the similarities here. I always remember that the Old Testament is the story of redemption, right? The first prophecy in the Bible was that the seed of the woman, the virgin-born seed of the woman, would crush Satan's head, would defeat Satan, right? The very first prophecy is the prophecy of a Messiah who is going to come. And there's an unfolding of who that Messiah will be and who that Messiah is. And we get it in types and shadows. We saw it when Abraham took Isaac up to the mountains of Moriah. And God stopped his hand before he could continue to sacrifice his own son on the very same mountains where God would sacrifice his own son. So it's an unfolding story and telling of the Messiah, of Jesus. So look at the undertones where Joseph and the story of Joseph and the story of Jesus share many, many similarities. And it begins here. His brothers hate him. His father sends him to his brothers, and his brothers hate him. So now in verse 12, his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers?" See, here's where Israel or Jacob sends Joseph to his brothers. "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them." And he said to him, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Here I am" could also be translated, "and I will go," or "and I go." So he said to him, "Go now and see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring the word." So go see what your brothers are doing and come back here and tell me. Go tell me what your brothers are doing. Go tell on your brothers. Right? They're in Shechem. If you don't know what happened at Shechem, you got to turn back a chapter or two. Right? Boy's sister was raped. Then the guy who raped her fell in love with her, and he wanted to marry her. And Shechem would say, "Okay, we want to do this, and what do we offer you in bribe price and all this stuff?" And they were tricked. The boys tricked them and said, "You have to be circumcised. Every man in the town must be circumcised, or we're not going to accept you as the husband of our sister." So the whole town circumcises themselves, and when they're laid up in bed recovering from the circumcision, Levi and Simeon, I believe, lead their men and kill every man in the town. So they massacre the whole town, capture the women and children, and now they take them as slaves. So Shechem is not a good place for these boys to be, but they have the flock at Shechem, and Jacob's going to send Joseph there to, and that was part of Genesis that we skipped, but you can turn back and read that story. So Jacob's going to show Joseph but I told you pretty much all of it. Jacob's going to send Joseph to check on him. "Now go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a man who found him wandering in the fields, and the man asked him, "What are you seeking?" He says, "I'm seeking my brothers." He said, "Tell me, please, where are they pasturing the flock?" And the man said, "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. Dothan was about 20 miles away, 20 miles farther away from Jacob. Verse 18, "They saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, 'Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams.' But when Reuben," remember Reuben was the firstborn. Another thing that we didn't touch on, Reuben slept with one of his father's concubines, so Reuben is on the outs with Jacob. Jacob is mad at Reuben, so here's Reuben's opportunity to get back in his father's good graces. He's going to save the beloved son, he thinks. That's another part of Genesis we didn't go over. Reuben went in, I think it was Bilhah he went into, but I can't remember. But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, 'Let us not take his life.' And Reuben said to them, 'Shed no blood, throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father.'" So Reuben, although he was afraid of his brothers, he was going to come and he thought he was going to do the right thing, probably so that his father would think well of him again, because like I said, his father was not very happy with Reuben. He had, matter of fact, taken his firstborn status away from him. And so here's Reuben's opportunity to get on Joseph's side. Verse 23, "So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty, there was no water in it, so it was a cistern there that they had. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry it down to Egypt. When Judah said to his brothers, 'What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh.' And his brothers listened to him. Then the Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver." If you want to turn to Leviticus chapter 25, early in, or 27, somewhere early in 27, chapter, verse 4 or 5, 6, something like that. The law tells us that the price for a 5-year-old to 20-year-old man was 20 shekels.
20 shekels.
20 shekels. So they sell him for the price of an average slave, young male slave. We see later that Jesus is sold for 30 pieces of silver, which was the going rate for a 30-some-year-old male slave at that point. So again, here's a parallel. He is sold for the going rate. Although he is his father's special son, he is in essence going to receive the reward of a firstborn, and yet his brothers don't treat him and don't get the worth. They don't sell him for what he's worth. In other words, the same thing that happened to Jesus. He was sold for a common slave. The same thing that happened to Joseph here. Sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone, and where shall I go?" Because, remember, Reuben is the firstborn and he's supposed to be in charge. Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, "This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not." And he identified it and said, "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him." Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. So this is the story of how Joseph makes his way to Egypt. He's now in Potiphar's house, and we'll see that things don't really go well for Joseph in Potiphar's house because of Potiphar's wife. But we do see the character of Joseph start coming out in Potiphar's house. We see the godly nature of Joseph. We see the maturity of Joseph. We see Joseph at his best in Potiphar's house. We see Joseph in his best in prison, and consequently throughout his life. Joseph is one of the absolute heroes of the scripture. But his brothers have turned on him. They have, in essence, convinced his father that he was dead. Here's his bloody coat that you gave him. He must have been eaten by wild animals. In the meantime, the chosen son, the beloved son, has gone to the Egyptians, where he will, in essence, make a kingdom from the Egyptians. Now, if you recall, expositional constancy tells us that if something is applied in the scripture symbolically once, it's most often constant in its understanding of the symbolic nature of that item throughout the scripture. For instance, the olive tree is often, or the fig tree is often, the fig tree is often symbolic for the nation of Israel, specifically the blessings of the nation of Israel. So when we see in both Matthew and Mark, Jesus, after the triumphal entry, he comes to the fig tree because the fig tree has leaves on it. That indicates the fig tree should have fruit on it. But it's in the spring, so it's really not the time for fruit. But Jesus goes to the fig tree to see if there is fruit on the fig tree. When he sees no fruit on the fig tree, he curses the fig tree. And then the next day, the apostles marvel that the fig tree has withered away. Well, and then later they ask Jesus, "When is the sign of the end of the age? When are you coming again, Jesus?" And Jesus has learned this lesson from the fig tree. When the fig tree begins to sprout again, lift up your head, your redemption draweth nigh. So when the fig tree is reborn, you better look for your Savior to come. All right, so if the fig tree is symbolic of the nation of Israel, God sends his son, just like Jacob sent Joseph, to seek his brothers, to find fruit from his brothers. He finds no fruit. He brings back a bad report, just like Joseph does. His brothers kill him, right? And then that curses the fig tree. He found no fruit, so he curses the fig tree. But the fig tree will be born again. And Jesus says, when the fig tree is born again, lift up your head. We're going to see that parallel play out through Joseph's life too. We'll get there. But I want you to understand that Joseph is in many ways a type or a shadow of the Messiah and what would happen to the Messiah and his brethren, the nation of Israel, and the 12 tribes. But I think we'll stop there because there might be questions. All right, somebody got to take up for Tracy. Tracy's not here. She would have questions.
I have a question. When I was learning this story for a Sunday school lesson, I read somewhere that a robe is typically like very long back in the day. I mean, I guess that makes sense kind of for today too. But and so when he was given the long robe, because the whole family was like shepherds, that it was also like indicated that furthermore he was the favorite because he had this long ornate robe that wouldn't get dirty. So it was kind of like his dad was saying, like, you don't have to do all the hard work that your brothers do.
Yeah, exactly. He's the favorite, right? So and I think that is borne out in the fact that his father keeps sending him to check on the others. He's like a foreman, right?
Mhm.
I'm assigning you as the foreman. Go check on those louts, your brothers. I know they're out there just, messing around, not doing it right. Go check on them.
He wasn't very good at this having a favorite son thing. You're supposed to be a lot more discreet.
Yeah, you are.
You're not supposed to know. You're not supposed to have a favorite.
Yeah.
The big no.
Fathers shouldn't do that.
No, it never works out well.
No.
Never works
He
out.
almost like pitted him for the brothers, it seems like.
Yeah. So, yeah. But yeah, it's the many colored that comes in during the Septuagint when they translated it to Greek, and I don't know that anybody has even tried to explain why, because it means, long robe goes down to your ankles, and long sleeved and goes down to your ankles. So it's a long robe. Not a good thing to wear if you're a shepherd, chasing them stupid sheep around all over the place. Because I know they may be cute, you ladies, but they're stupid. They're some stupid animals.
They're stupid and smelly.
They're stupid and smelly. And if they fall over on their back, especially if they're pregnant, they can't roll over. You got to pull them. You got to roll them over, or they'll die. Kicking them little spindly legs up in the air.
Yeah.
Good to know, Jeff. Thank you.
Oh, you ladies were outside with the kids when I showed that video in Sunday school.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, with the male goat, a male sheep trying to headbutt the bucket, and it flipped it over on its back. Yeah, they're brilliant animals.
Oh yeah.
Hey, yeah, question. Was it foretold to Jacob that Joseph would be, quote, the chosen one for him?
We're not told in the
No.
text. No, the text does
Yeah.
not say that. Yeah, it's just it's just Jacob being Jacob.
Yeah. Okay.
It's
Not
just
learning
who
his
Jacob
lessons
is.
from his past.
Yeah, it's Jacob being Jacob. Now, we did see, when he wrestled with God and he, God touched his hip, that there was a slight change in his demeanor to God, right? He humbled himself, he repented, but he didn't totally let go of who he was. Jacob is still being Jacob. And so,
I always found that it was, well, to me, refreshing, because I always thought that Joseph was one of the finer quality characters in the Bible, and he was basically a snotwad kid until he was thrown in that pit.
yeah.
But from the moment he's taken out of that pit, it's like he's born again. He has
Yeah.
a whole different perspective on life. He doesn't miss the coat. He recognizes the priorities of his future. He becomes noble. He becomes honorable.
Uh-huh.
You know, it's like getting thrown in a pit was the best thing that could have happened to him.
He becomes a godly man. He becomes a
Yeah.
godly young man. And so then he's right on par with Daniel. Right? We're never told anything bad about Daniel.
Right.
There's nothing in the story of Daniel that says, okay, well, Daniel was, slipped up. Well, I mean, look at Abraham, the father Abraham, the father of us all, right? Sarah gets mad at him because Hagar is, being a little pissy, excuse my language, being a little pissy with her. So Abraham said, well, do with her what you want. Wait a minute. She's pregnant with your child, Abraham. How can you act like that? Right. So, we see Abraham's flaws. We see Isaac's flaws. We see Jacob's flaws. And Joseph, right? Yeah, he was a 17-year-old snot-nosed. But then he is one of the most godly characters in the scripture,
In scripture.
along with Daniel. And, look at King David. Wow, David got some issues, buddy.
Yeah.
Solomon got some issues, and the Bible is not. And that's one of the reasons we know the Bible is true, because the Bible does not hide the flaws of its heroes. It does not
That's
hide
exactly
the flaws of its
right.
characters. The New Testament, the apostles, they do not hide their flaws. Right? We
Very
talked about,
human.
They all have their warts.
right. We talked not too long ago about Paul having to chastise Peter, and instead of getting angry, instead of carrying a grudge against Paul, what does Peter call him in his epistle? Our beloved brother Paul. Right. So they don't hide their warts, which is a good indication that they're telling their truth. They're speaking their truth.
Absolutely agree.
What they do. So
I want to speak up in defense of Joseph. I've heard in several different classes he was causing his own problems, but I see him as a young man who was loved, but was so maybe obtuse, he wasn't aware. He was so childlike and trusting. And I may be using this word wrong, but without guile, I see him as just like a childlike. We're supposed to become like children to come to God. And here's this young man given everything Papa could give him. And he just ate it up, and he assumed everybody loved him like he loved them. And it just never occurred to him that he was annoying people, his brothers. But yeah, he just didn't know. You notice he wasn't even screaming out, or they don't record him screaming out that he had been thrown in a pit.
yeah.
And he may or may not have been able to hear his brothers talking, but sure, there's none of the, if he had had a little bit of my cynicism, say, he would have picked up that things were going wrong.
I'm just
So I
impressed.
think-
I'm impressed we heard of obtuse and guile in the same defense of Joseph.
Yeah.
That was impressive.
Yeah.
Well,
Well-
now you see, that was in the past. I don't remember what I said, but just like you spoke up for Leah, I'm speaking up for Joseph.
And I think I lean more to you than the other, because the text indicates that Jacob is the driver behind sending Joseph. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, however, I have been a 17-year-old boy
Uh-huh.
with an older brother, right? So if my daddy had given me a coat, a special coat, wisdom would have told me, if my daddy sends me to check on my brother, don't wear the coat. But wear the reminder, right?
Mhm.
But
he was so innocent. He just never occurred to him. I got to tell you, I was the
this is
favorite.
where we're going to disagree, because I was a 17-year-old boy, and if I got
Yeah.
the coat, I'm wearing the coat, because I want my older brothers to remember, hey, my daddy sent me here to check on you.
It's sort of a,
Yeah, I mean that is normal, and that you can ask. There's 3 men on here, and I don't want to speak for them, but I can promise you, if they were put in that position, yeah, they're wearing the coat. Terry,
Well-
would you wear the coat?
is that called hubris?
Yeah,
Called hubris, yes, but it's
it's arrogance, it's
teenager,
hubris,
you don't
it's
get it.
yeah, it's
Well, here, Jeff, here's a couple things that, as everybody was talking, I was thinking about too, is like, I think that Joseph was he felt as if he was the favorite because the authority that was given to him by his father, a human being. But I think the game changer and the wake up call for Joseph was the dream, because I think at that point in his life, I can't help but believe that he was given that dream, that it's like at that point, it seems like he just went with the flow, because he knew that God was behind everything that happened. And I think the whole story of Joseph, there's just that acceptance that
Yeah, but why
as
does
bad as it
Joseph feel
got,
the necessity to tell his brothers the dream?
He's happy. His brothers will surely share his joy.
You may be right. You know,
It's a
the
slim
text does
chance.
not tell us either way. The text just says Joseph told them the dream, and they didn't like it.
Yeah, I know.
And the text says even before he told them the dream, they could not speak peaceably to him. So every word that came out of their mouth when they addressed Joseph was not pleasant. Right?
To them.
They could
It's
not, and that's what the text said. They could not speak peaceably to him.
And he just did. He was over his
Just
head.
went right over his head. Right?
Yeah. What a sweetheart.
Yeah, what a sweetheart. who was brilliant enough to become Pharaoh's right-hand man.
Yeah.
But he
yeah.
had no common sense to understand his brothers were calling him names to his face.
Again, he had no common sense of that until he was thrown in a pit.
Right.
And I think he must have hit his head when he got to the bottom of the pit. And it kind of woke him up. Hey, my brothers really don't like me. Why? And then he figured it out.
What have I done?
Yeah.
Exactly.
well, the other part is it's by taking the coat from him, they took whatever authority he might have thought he had.
They
That's-
attempted to take his authority.
Right. But I think at that point, and he couldn't help but, understand that you take my coat, I will still be the person that God has chosen me to be.
And they were thinking the authority came from Jacob, whereas the true authority was coming from God.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
The coat
So-
meant nothing.
All right. Let me stop the recording.